Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good evening, hello, and welcome wherever you are. So, this is our much tweeted, much excitement about our this event, and we'll hang on a little while until we get our friends and colleagues. We know they're joining us from around, so we can all say a few words until then, and we'll restart the whole thing again. We'll give people a few minutes to join. So, as you can hear me, my name is Tariq Mahmood. On your screen also is Ivan Rishani, Faye Aouni, and then we've got Don Vino. In due time, we shall explain why Vince Khosub is Don Vino. And in our and we are joined by people already. Thank you, Wissam, for being here, and we'll take questions later on. We know people are joining us from different parts of the world, and we are happy to answer any questions. So we will start in really kicking off. Oh dear, I think we've got some jokers coming in as well here. I don't think so. I think you're in the wrong place, Kareem. Okay, now let us kick off. Okay, thank you very much for joining us, and those of you who join us later on. My name is Tariq Mahmood. I am a teacher at the American University of Beirut. I don't know if any students learn from me or not. We are honored to have with us Vince Khosub. In case those of you who are wondering why we have Vince Khosub, I don't know what to say, but this is what I've learned, that in the world of video games, Vince Khosub's pseudonym is Don Vino, and those of you play lots of video games, you will find out. I have learned, those of you who are joining now, that a game is not something that we play, but it's often that plays us as well. I am a novelist and a writer, and I have hidden here, he will be joining us now for a quick entrance, Peter Kalu. He is another writer. So we will make a very, very quick introduction of where we are in terms of literature and film, literature and video. Let me first start off by sharing with you our esteemed guest, Vince Khosub, the CEO of Falafel Games, and this is a shot from their website. And Vince will explain later on how we met. We can discuss in the things. And Vince, we are honored, is working to make a video game out of a triptych of novels that we have written. And Peter Kalu will say a few words about the triptych now, and then we will say a few more words later on. So Peter Kalu is here.
Thank you, Terry, for this introduction. Yes, so we're three novelists, myself, Tariq Mahmood, and Melvin Burgess, and we created a world environment in which we wrote the novels. So that environment is a dystopian future in which a right-wing government, a white supremacist right-wing government, has effectively come to power and force all those who don't conform to their ideology to seek ways of survival. So it's a rather bleak landscape full of disconnects, disruptions, and difficulties. And we've created 6 main characters, and we've drawn upon the expertise of Vince and our guests here and others to start developing a game from this world.
Thank you very much, Pete. And Faye is going to say a few words. Faye and Yvonne are 2 of my brilliant students out of a class of brilliant students. Many of them are with us now. and others are sending us comments, and we will do our best to address them. And of course, whilst you can't see her, we have an editorial controller, another brilliant student called Noor. She is in the background who's making sure that we all behave. Faye.
So, hello everyone. I'm very, very excited to be here, and so are my classmates. And I think this is an amazing opportunity. The thing I found most interesting is the fact that there are three stories coming together in the form of a video game, and I've never really seen this happening before. So, I'm very excited to be talking about this and asking questions to learn more about everything. And I hope this can be a learning experience for all of us. And thank you for this opportunity. So, Yvonne, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Professor Tariq, for the nice introduction. And we're happy to have you here, Mr. Vincent Khussoub, Mr. Peter Kalu. It's an absolute honor. And it's just nice to see this new sort of thing where we transform not one novel, but three into a video game. And there's lots of questions that can be asked, in this process. It's not going to be a simple one. And so, yeah, I'm very excited to conduct this interview. And so thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Peter and I will disappear off the screen for a while, and or certainly Peter, if you can, and we will come back in a few minutes. Okay, Yvonne and Faye, please, as we planned, you are going to ask Vince some questions, and we will take questions from our comments as well in due time.
Thank you, Professor. So,
Thank you.
Mr. Khussoub,
Yeah,
thank you
hi.
for coming up. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
You're feeling well. So,
I feel it's a sit up. Go
no, just
go
get
ahead.
started.
Shoot away.
Yeah. So first, I'd like to throw a question because it's like you've probably seen this one coming. Just like as an opener, we've had crisis after crisis, and I don't think I have to elaborate much on that. We've had the COVID, the dollar crisis, we've had all sorts of problems, and so I'd like to ask you first, as like an opening question, how has this affected your line of work? What can you tell us about that? The difficulties, the challenges. How did you cope?
So despite all the crises, consequent, subsequent, and on top of each other happening, it was. Last year, generally speaking, was a boon year. Sorry about this. I had an earthquake, one of those crises. Was a boon year for the gaming industry in general. We kind of, generally speaking, the market got propelled forward by maybe about 2 years. So it was, COVID was sort of like an accelerator of time. A lot of the old people died earlier than they were supposed to, sadly, and some markets that were expected to grow in due time grew earlier, prematurely, such as games. So generally speaking, there's sadly and not sadly, there's a lot of optimism in the games industry. Now, more practically, how it affected us. Obviously, our own office was directly affected by the blast in Beirut. Lockdowns affected us. In our specific case, we actually did an experiment of moving to work from remote early on. I think we started it early February 2020. So before any measure in any country other than China. Having lived in China before, I had the hunch that this, will spread and could be critical. So I decided to give an attempt to go work remotely. And 2 months later, we're probably the first company in Lebanon to have moved permanently remotely. In the first couple of weeks, we faced a lot of trouble working remote, and then we fixed them. And then we figured that it was better in general. Now, in the case of Lebanon, or the employees in Lebanon, there was more advantages to working from home other than just working from home. They got rid of traffic. They got rid of the stress you face going to work and back from work, or going to school and back from work, finding that the bank is closed and the bank is not closed, and having sit-ins and demonstrations on your way, whether you like them or not. It's sort of a nuisance for your day-to-day. So that was lucky, that we had good, let's call it good work hygiene. Another lucky factor was that most of my teammates do not live in Beirut. Most of them actually live in villages away from Beirut, most of them. And that's a very comforting place to be in the current situation in Lebanon. So they're just like coding away on their balcony, having their coffee, and cleaner air than in closer to Beirut or to the cities. And it was a lucky thing for me. It's nothing by design.
I see. I see. Thank you. And so the team is relatively. How many members are we talking?
We're a dozen in Lebanon.
Okay. Okay. That's nice. That's nice. So it's still. So I like how you turned it into an opportunity instead of a a liability. So that was interesting. And so you're one of the few, if not the only, game company to focus your games on Arabic language and Arabic context exclusively. And so, other than that being a unique move, like it's nice how you value the culture and stuff. First, what can you tell me about the difference between the Arabic market, which is your target audience, as opposed to, let's say, the one size fits all commercialized, or let's say the Western market? What can you tell me a bit about that? How do you tailor the experience and such?
Okay, so first of all, for a long time we were exclusively targeting Arabic. Now we're targeting Arabic speakers first. So we try to capitalize on Arabic speakers and expand from there. Regarding the difference between this region and what you called more universal works, at the fundamental level, it's not much. Games are universal experiences. Okay, throwing a ball in a hole is fun for a lot of people who like basketball, or shooting a ball into a net is fun for a lot of people who play soccer. So fundamentally, it's a universal human experience. Now, it's so complex and so layered that sometimes you have layers of narrative and layers of culture in there. And anywhere in the world, the cultural layer has to be authentic for it to be successful. Okay, and it's not in the Middle East. It's not an exception. If you make it quite authentic, and I'll give you examples where we made it authentic and it worked, and where we did not make it authentic and it did not work. So you might say one size fits all in global games, but it's also not really true. I mean, you have Norse mythology. If you look at Scandi countries, they make Norse mythology games much better than others. For example, Valheim or Supercell's game. Okay, so these were all developed in Sweden and Finland, and they're Norse and Viking stuff mythology, right? Norse mythology or Viking, and they're quite authentic, and they resonate well with the players when they are authentic. When you write authentically, you resonate. Sometimes the reader or the person experiencing your work does not have to know what you're talking about, what you're doing, but the authenticity of it resonates there. So okay, you might tell me you have American companies doing Spartan themes, okay, and how is that authentic? Well, it is for them. Greek for them, as far as they're concerned, it's a cultural legacy of theirs. The Greek, the classical period. So in our case, it's the same. It's as long as you come up with their narrative layer. You don't always have to have it for a game to be universally appealing in terms of gameplay. But when you want it, that layer, be authentic. Sometimes it's not only the narrative part that has to be authentic. Sometimes it's nuances in terms of how your local or regional audience likes to experience things or like to behave. Let's say you're playing football, okay, or soccer, or And so some people like the very competitive aspect for it. There's killer. Some people like the cooperative. They like to like pass around and chit chat after the game and stuff like that. So different audiences may experience the same game differently. So sometimes that is a layer that has specifics, regional specifics. Okay, and there's a bit of generalization in there, but each region has its own specificities. Speaking about Arabic speakers, their specificity is that they are quite competitive and they are quite social. Yeah, that's a long answer to a,
Nah, that's lovely. Thank you.
of a possibly even longer one.
Comprehensive. Faye, would you like to jump in?
Yes, I thought the answer was very interesting because one of the main things that caught my eye when I was like researching your games is the fact that they're very authentic and very relatable. And I think that's partially because you're an AUB student just like us, and because you understand like the things that we've been through and the things that we've experienced. So one of my favorite games that you made, it's called Fursan al-Majd, Knights of Glory, and I like the fact that it was very story-driven and deep. And I also discovered Fathal, which is very like a competitive, like mobile game. So I thought it was very interesting to see this shift from like story-based game to like very like social mobile games. So could you explain a bit the thought process behind the shift from games like Farsan al-Majd to games like Fathal?
Okay, this is not a linear. This was not a linear process. Currently, I mean, games like Fathal take a couple of months to build, and game like Fursan al-Majd take a couple of years. So we're always into cycles that are overlapping each other. So currently, and our model changed a little bit. So there are games out there that are not under our name that we license out. We develop for other publishers. For example, you can look up a game right now called Muluk al-Nar in Arabic, Muluk al-Nar. Okay, so these kind of games are much closer to Fursan al-Majd. Now, going back to differences between Fathal, specific question, okay, between Fathal and a game like Fursan al-Majd, which is one of our classics. And Fathal is more of a recent experiment. It's not a classic at all, Fathal, currently. Both do rely on different layers of specifics of regional audiences, as I just discussed earlier. So Fursan al-Majd has a strong, obviously, narrative element. And it has a piece of incidental learning, because in Fursan al-Majd you have about 300 heroes. You had about 300 heroes from the Arab conquest, Futuhat Islamiyya. You wouldn't see them at school, these guys, many of them. You certainly, in many cases, you wouldn't see them illustrated. That's like could be a big no, but depends how you handle it. While Fathal is just like questions and answers, but as you mentioned, Fathal could be a competitive game / social game, which is quite appealing to Arabic speakers. Now, so both appeal, so both are grounded into the regional / local audiences, but from different aspects. From that dimension, they're not very different. They do satisfy our mission of culturally faithful products. One note about Fathal specifically is the fact that it belongs to the trivia category. So the trivia and the word categories is something, at least from like a marketing point of view, very attractive experiment for us, because almost every other category you can play the games in any language. You don't need languages. You just go in, and the experience is good enough. It draws you in. You get engaged with the product. But in word and trivia, it must be necessarily your local language. So what this means, it can attract local players who like this genre, but are not supplied with such genre more effectively than the other categories. And that is an observation that we validated with numbers. that it's so easy to attract those players. Now they are not as as hardcore as the players of Fursan al-Majd, but they come much easier also. Try to translate a trivia game, with like English content, okay, to Arabic, and you'll end up asking the Arabic players questions about the NHL and the NFL and Beyonce. And okay, maybe they know some, they don't know others. And the text might be Arabic, but it's not there. It's not there. So the nice thing about Word and Trivia is that as gameplay is concerned, pure gameplay, forget the narrative, it must be in local language. The others, as far as gameplay is concerned, it can be any language or in any content, any culture. Yeah.
So that's very interesting. I've noticed something here. So, Fursan al-Majd is a game typically like it has lots of Arab folklore, let's say, and culture. Okay, like with the Islam and the heroes, and you get my gist. And so, as opposed to, let's say, the trivia game Fathal, which does have some of the culture and but without the stories. So it's more the questions are gonna be focused on local knowledge, let's say, as opposed to Fursan al-Majd, which has the folklore and stories incremented into it. So, can you first tell us a bit about the importance of folklore and using your own local culture in games, and how using the stories in Fursan al-Majd as opposed to the knowledge and the culture questions, let's say, in the trivia?
If I understand the question well, it's the difference between using local flavor in the story versus local flavor inside of the gameplay.
Yes, to put it simply, yeah.
Okay. Good question and tough question. So a major difference is the one I just alluded to earlier, is the fact that when it's baked into the gameplay, you can, believe it or not, attract players much easier than when it's just a story. So Fursan al-Majd is a turn-based RPG, strategy RPG. Okay. I think I lost the. I don't know if Yvonne.
No, we are still here. We are still here.
Sorry,
You're in spotlight.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's say a Saudi player sees an introduction about Fursan al-Majd. They can say, "Oh, wow, it's about the Arab conquest," right? But they can also say, "Oh, it's another turn-based RPG." Okay. So if I show it to two, let's say one downloads it, just to be vulgar in the numbers. Okay. Because the other one thought it's a turn-based RPG and they don't want to play it. They've already played Final Fantasy. Okay. While if I show Fathal to two-player, both will download it because they don't have another option. So that's an important difference, And although the work that goes into Fursan al-Majd is so much more than the work that into the local flavor for Fursan al-Majd. It's so much more than the work that goes into Fathal, but it's like tiny little David who does good in attracting players. Fathal. Another difference is more on the on the cultural side. Okay. When you bake it into the gameplay, and you can only do it with Word and Trivia, baking it in the gameplay, okay, the local flavor, you're kind of putting education or the aspect of content right there, shoving it down the throat of the user. You're going to answer me how many rivers there are in Najd, in Saudi Arabia. You're going to answer. You have to answer. And if you don't know it, you will lose. Right? While the other ones, where it's more subtly baked into the narratives. And when I say narratives, it's not only dialogues and texts. It's the items, the heroes, the dresses, the settings, the backgrounds, everything. Even the UI sometimes develop with a sense of story. When it's that, it's more incidental learning or more incidental experience. So you really want to, let's say it's a turn-based RPG, you really want to find your roster of heroes and level up the right hero and put in the right combination so you win the next battle. Okay, that has nothing to do with the story. But incidentally, you are combining Khalid ibn al-Walid with Tariq bin Ziyad and equipping them with like some specific swords and flags and things like that. That with repetition can mean something. Do mean something to you, but with repetition can affect you without being very explicit.
Absolutely fantastic answer. Thank you for that. And so, which leads me to the next one. So you started off with Fursan al-Majd, which has a narrative, it has story, culture, all of that, and then you switched to a bit more of a casual genre, if I'm not mistaken, which is like the trivia, the crosswords, and now you're going back to making narratives. So how does that make you feel? How does it feel like? And could you tell us a bit about like translating
We
a novel?
actually never stopped making narratives, but
Okay.
making a narrative game
Yeah.
takes you years. So on average, a narrative game like Fursan al-Majd took us a year and a half from starting the project to releasing the beta version, and the beta version spent 11 months on the market until we were satisfied with the optimization of the game, and we doubled down on growing its reach. After that, we released games like Harb. We were just less vocal on the PR side, us as a company. We figured with Fursan al-Majd it wasn't very important. We just needed people to experience it, and you know about that because you probably play games that were not heard of by most of your entourage. Your parents are like, what is this? And your friends are like, what is this game? But you're like, oh, man, everybody's playing it. But no, nobody knows about it. So you figured that just speaking about things you're doing aloud, at least in the media of our region, was not very useful for us. So we did a game called Harb al-Hurub, which is a strategy game, 4X game, that has a narrative relating to modern wars of the Middle East. So it had Soviet tanks and M16s and things like that. We also did a game called Dir al-Jazeera, which is a build and battle game, kind of like Clash of Clans, which is also a lot of tanks, but modern tanks, a bit more fantasy than Harb al-Hurub. We did Action Anime, which is a turn-based RPG game. Now, Action Anime has no story, has no characters related to directly related to Arabic culture, but it has a lot of game modes, competitive game modes that appeals to these players, and we released it. So sometimes you see things in your audience that are not necessarily from the history books. It was released at a point where anime was very big in Saudi. It had blown at some point. It was very big in Saudi, and we're like, game with anime would be cool. We tried to do action anime too, by the way, and it failed miserably. We killed it during the production. What we tried to do with it is having Arabic style heroes, anime with anime illustration. The big eyes, the small nose, but they were all Arabian. Some were like muscular, some were more cute, and it failed. The Saudis were like, this is not anime. This is some I don't know, some bastard creature. It's not anime. They want to see the real Japanese anime. And we're still looking, by the way, for, not me myself or Falafel Games, but I think as an industry we're looking for the Arabic style to come out. So when you see like some game that is made by a Japanese studio, like, this is a Japanese game, right? But you never see a game like, this is made from like some Arabic studio. You never see that yet. So it's work in progress. And more recently, we also did a strategy game called Muluk al-Nar, which is semi-realistic game inspired by like you can call it Islamic medieval period, but also with a lot of fantasy. So you can just think of it as inspired by like Islamic medieval mythology, actually, which was huge during the Abbasid Empire and all of this. Today we just subdue this topic, but it was the basis of science, in fact, back then. And science, علم, not science meaning knowledge, right? But it's gone now. So anyways, yeah, so we did never stop the narrative, but making a game is not a game that you can have people come to it and pay on it because you need to survive, so you make the next one, is a matter of years. Making casual games is a matter of months.
So you mentioned a few times about the process of creating a game, and that you had to scrap some ideas because the audience ended up being like, what's going on here? So my question is, were there any other games that Shrey gave you a hard time in the development process that you had to maybe scrap a few times?
Yeah, we scrapped most of the games. Most of the games are scrapped. We've scrapped cartoonish strategy RPG games. Sometimes we scrapped them early on in the process. Sometimes when they first launched, we scrapped that was a very painful scrap, but we had to scrap it. A multiplayer trivia game, but with an adventure mode and RPG elements, and a football theme. So all of this put together. Now, when we launched it was called بطولة الأذكياء. It was so painful because it got amazing KPIs. It got amazing figures. It was able to attract so many players with so little effort, because of the football theme and Captain Majid style illustrations. And it got amazing retention. So people would just stick to it. We just were never able to monetize it. And some other games, we stopped developing them after a month of production, so very early, because we actually try to talk to the market when we start the game, the production of the game. And when we talk to the market, we rely on qualitative as well as quantitative. We promote concepts of the game, we promote theme, we promote art, and we see that the interaction is not good, so we stop it. And more often than not, we scrap games because we're kind of like constantly internally in a horse race, whereby we have multiple babies running at the same time. And we see that we're doing better with one, the market is doing better with one than others. So we just let the others take a rest and focus our resources on the one. I was very lucky to have met the CEO of Supercell once, and we had this discussion about killing games. So Supercell is known for celebrating failure, and so when they scrap a game, they go out and drink champagne. When they launch a game to global launch, which means they're doubling down on marketing and growing its reach, they go out and drink a beer. And their hit rate, according to him, I don't know if I'm probably not confidential, is less than 10%. So out of 10 games, they scrap 9. Mozart was like that. Even Mozart would, if you look at his like early stages, the early stages of his career, he was a child. But even until he was a young adult, he would just write and throw away, compose and throw away, compose and throw away. So today, when you look at the compositions of the works of Mozart, you say they're like numbered. You see they're numbered with a K, Köchel. So that is the guy who actually ran after Mozart and started collecting his work and organizing them by type and by sequence. And even after that organization, you see a lot of quote unquote bugs in Mozart's composition. He has so many like counterpoint mistakes. Counterpoint is like the classic way of composing during the classic period of music, which started in the mid 18th century. So that's Mozart era, after Bach and after the Baroque. So many mistakes according to the rules of the period of how you should write music, but they're just bugs basically, because he's just going through all this creative work. So don't there's a sunk cost fallacy that a lot of game developers fall into. You should just, like, I think, in my opinion, at least it's my opinion, keep it an opinion, okay? Liberate yourself from sunk cost fallacy. It's okay, kill games, throw them in the garbage. Don't worry about JPEG waste. There's no such thing as JPEG waste. If a lot of illustrations that nobody's seeing and they're thrown away, it's not a problem.
So our classmate asked a question related to what we were just talking about in chat. The question was, do your narrative long-term games give a good return on investment, or are they primarily projects of passion that are paid for by shorter projects?
So we do actually it's not really about narrative or not narrative. The games that make better income for us are the mid-core games. It's like a whole umbrella of genres. So, for example, strategy 4X games, they monetize well. Turn-based RPG games, they monetize well. At least they monetize much better than the more casual games. So they're not at all. I mean, they're not purely passion projects. Now, having said that, it doesn't mean a lot of our projects that failed because we did not have passion for them also. So you're like, I think, I saw some presentation, I don't know, some genre, let's say MOBA, okay? So the games like Dota and League is growing so fast. I am not passionate about MOBA. I know nothing of MOBA, but I'm gonna do a MOBA game. That's almost a recipe for disaster. So you need to have, and another thing is making a game needs a very, very deep stamina. You need stamina for making games, but it actually starts the day you launch it. It doesn't end the day you launch it. So it's a marathon. So you need some level of passion. So, to try to answer now, summarize the answer is you try to join passion to commercial. So if, is a good way to sustain your income. Now, if the question was, how do you finance those long-term gains that need, long investment? I mean, there's more and more avenues for financing such games. One of them being having a team that is ready to survive for 2-3 months on Labni, right? And whose skills are complementary. To start with something, and then you can go to publishers and you can go to game investors. These actually game investors, when we first started, was not a species that existed. Now they exist. Publishers always existed. But even then, there's a lot of. It's not like 4 or 5. It's very rare to find a team that's like 4 or 5 friends from university with just graduate level experience in making games, being able 2-3 months later to attract investors. So it's good to cross-pollinate your team with people who've had some track record, because this is a sign of de-risking for publishers. I only know of one team that I personally only know of one team that made it with a big game. Well, a relatively big game, not a huge game, but a game that needed about a year to produce and about 10 people to produce, that made it completely bootstrapped without anybody giving them money and with nobody on their team who was a track record. They were just a bunch of friends from university, and they hung out together until they finished the game. So they did not take salaries for a year. It's called BetaWorks. I don't know if you can check. It's a Danish team. Now, the good thing about their environment is that they probably got some unemployment benefits when they were working on it, or maybe they were masters at the university, so they were being paid for research, or I don't know, you know. So, but they found a way to survive that trough. Otherwise, until then, it's a good idea. It's not ideal, but it's a good idea because it's a good it's your last resort to actually help produce games. You know, give your time as a freelancer or something, so that you finance your labne, can eat your labne while you produce your game that is going to be a big hit.
Beautiful. That's how far passion can get us, at least. Shall we move on to the triptych? How do you feel working on transforming the novels into the game? How do you feel about the project, Falafel Games, and the team working on that?
Well, first of all, I think so. When I met Tariq and Peter and Melvin, me and my colleague, we were kind of like inspired by the first of all by the writers. Before the story, we hadn't read the story, but we were inspired. It's so rare to see, you know, this tendency of counterculture, and knowing that these guys are working on making it an actual deliverable, an actual book. And you know, Peter and Tariq's books are still due, but we had the privilege to have a sneak peek into them. So, and counterculture is something just intuitively appealing to my team, and I think generally to gamers. So you can see how things, you know, how Robin Hoodie gamer were on Reddit, and you know, with like they kind of they're quick to call out, you know, establishment practices. So it was something generally appealing. Also, another thing that's appealing in the writers and in the stories is the diversity. So you know, it's not the white male hero that you usually saving all the you know, peoples of the world that you see. There's diversity, you know, racial diversity, sexual diversity, religious diversity, and some, you know, it's some characters have their own religions, it seems, in the game, their own beliefs, at least sets of beliefs. So that's also attractive, because we do believe, you know, that يحق للشاعر ما لا يحق لغيره. So, and we are the poet in this case. You know, game makers have rights that others don't have. That's our claim to equality. So all this, you know, this diversity in writers, the counterculture was something very attractive. But also the storylines. So the storylines have some element of fantasy with some element grounded in a lot of prejudice in current societies. So putting together fantasy with prejudice and questioning them is something very appealing. So we thought, you know, as far as the books were concerned, was something very attractive. And other reasons that were closer to our internal reasons is that actually my team is very very keen on PC games.
Yes, he was saying that his team is very keen on PC games, and also for us, from our perspective, it has been a journey of collaboration. As writers, we have developed these novels, but something that Vince was saying earlier about the authenticity and the setting of the games in an environment and with a set of drivers, if you like, that are authentic, means that in moving from the books to the game, we as writers, I believe, recognize that we gained by surrendering, meaning that the game will be different from the books, and it did, of course, as writers, we can be precious at times, and there were phases in which everyone was saying, "No, you must do exactly as happens in the book," or my character must stand center stage at this point. But gradually we learn, and sorry, I think it's a principle of collaboration that you let go as well, and you allow the new creatives to infuse and inform and shape a new narrative in effect. So what the game is becoming is not actually a representation of the book. The game is becoming its own thing, and I do believe that many of the things that are evolving, that are coming into being, are things that we could never have anticipated. The world, sometimes is upside down. Sometimes sections of the book or the world just disappear. Other times they become fragmented or flip into a different way of being. And all those dislocations, diversions, and unexpected discoveries, I think, are part of the artistic process. And I do believe Don Vino is doing a great representation of all those principles right now. Vince, you disappeared for a little while, and I was covering for you, or enlarging upon what you were saying. As I shall.
I think he's out again. That was a good save, Mr. Kalu. Yeah, that happens. That happens.
Yeah, I think it is important that when we develop the game, that we have input and we allow a new thing to evolve. And I do recall Vince was saying about the experiment using the anime form, but with our characteristics, if you like, and then how that failed, perhaps, it failed to engage Vince's back, and so we have to be prepared for new things and new ways of presenting the world that we've created in the books, because gaming is, if I speak metaphorically, gaming is a different language to novels. There are different kind of rules or grammars, etc. And so, yeah, it's a great journey of discovery for us. Now, I can continue, or you may want to ask me a question, or we may go back to Vince.
So
Continue, man.
I would like to ask a question if that's okay with everyone. Yeah, so two things that both Mr. Kalu and Mr. Rassoub mentioned are diversity and sacrifice. So I think this is very interesting because, as Mr. Kalu said, sometimes there has to be some sacrifices that are made in order to be able to translate the story into a video game. And based on my research, I learned that there were characters in Mr. Kalu's story and in the other writer's story that were members of the LGBTQ community, and that there were some transgender characters. And I know that Falafel Games' target audience tends to be the MENA region. So I'm curious as to if there were any difficulties that kind of like clashed when it came to representing certain characters when it comes to certain target audience, because this tends to be somewhat of a controversial or a touchy subject. But Mr. Rassoub mentioned a lot about like kind of breaking these boundaries. So I was wondering if any of you would like to comment on this.
So first of all, this game is not targeted to Arabic speakers only. It's more of a global audience, and includes a segment of the Arabic speakers. And before I got cut off, this was one of the attractive points to my team. So I was mentioning PC games, and going global also was something attractive to them. Now, even if it were targeted exclusively or primarily to the Arabic speakers, we got our baptism of fire with this audience a long time ago. When, for example, like Ivan mentioned Fursan al-Majd. So with Fursan al-Majd, you have Sahaba that is being illustrated. It could be, or it could be problematic. And so it's a very, we learned that the society is a very, it's, I'm gonna be very cliche, but we learned it the hard way, that it's a very fragmented society, and with a lot of opinions, and with a lot of segments, and you have all sorts of people in this society. And what and but at the same time, uh, unfortunately, to many members of society, the norms of education, or the more norms of communications, or the norms of mass media are very, let's call it, almost dogmatic, and are very orthodox in the way they convey the values. So a young lady is supposed to know how to clean dishes and be a good wife because we're gonna marry her off to I don't know who, and you have a young man is supposed to be sham, have, I don't know what's sham in English, like yeah, some form of strength, but more like valor, right? Has to have valor and things like that. Okay, I mean, some things are good in a certain context, but you cannot be so universal about your approach and so dogmatic, and so uh, and we kind of learned it, and we don't really pride, or we don't try to be counterculture. We like the counterculture of the writer's book, Pete and Melvin and Tariq, but we're more realistic, we're more down to earth about it. We all know there's all sorts of sexual and religious and racial also diversity in the Middle East. It's just the way the establishment conveys them uh, that leaves a lot of space for us actually to communicate whatever we want to communicate. So I don't see it at all as any conflict.
That's very interesting to hear. And also, I just wanted to mention something about like you said, like certain people might say like, oh, listen, the woman has to know how to cook, and the man has to be all muscular and big, and that was very relatable, honestly, because as a woman who plays video games, my mom would always say like, why to play video games? Why can't you like go buy makeup? Why are you wasting money on games? And I'm like, it's just
Yeah.
something that's interesting. And I think it's cool that you represent everyone very well in your games, and that's something that makes the games very relatable. And something I would add is I'm very interested in taking part of the gaming industry. So as a woman, I would like to know, like, if there are certain steps that are taken during the writing process and the game development process that kind of breaks these stigmas in a way that motivates more women to like approach these types of like career options.
No, usually it's not really in the content that you write or the content that you create that you can really break through the industry. And that's how it's not supposed to be. So the gaming industry, so what do I mean? As a woman, okay, as a woman, you naturally will have, I cannot reject the fact that you will naturally have a certain different cultural output than a male. Okay, this is it, I don't know. Let's say you have a twin brother and you grew up the same way. You two are going to have different outputs. Um, but today, the gaming industry has a problem, and it does not appreciate that because the gaming industry is dominated by chauvinistic males, usually, um, predominantly. Um, and so but now it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean they do it out of chauvinism, that they don't accept women into the game industry. They do it out of ignorance. They think that what they do is what needs to be done, and when they see your output, they're like, what the hell is that? I don't know what this is, this girl is presenting. Don't accept her. uh, Now it doesn't mean that your content is going to be your main way to enter. At the same time, they are ignorant yet reasonable. So if they see good quality, they recognize good quality, and if they see good quality that the content of which they perceive as perverted as far as they're concerned, right? Because a lot of gaming professionals have very narrow views of what content can be. They would still accept you. So I'd say, just work on the quality, and the industry is today cleaning itself out of its narrow sighted approach and male dominance. In fact, it's a big topic that um, uh, trying to have diversity in the teams does make better games. Trying to have diversity in the leadership teams results in better games. So investing, I know of a case where it was maybe I'm being chauvinistic, but it was a bad team and a bad product led by a woman. Okay, maybe I'm ignorant, right? Maybe it's a great product and a great team for some other segment, certainly not me. So I was like, this is not a very attractive proposition. Yet they were invested by one of the leading investors in the industry. Uh, Maybe I will name the names in private because I already gave a strong opinion about the team. Uh, but I know also for a fact that investor invested because the team was led by a woman. They did not check anything else. They saw it was led by a woman. They're like, we're going in. But their social, at the same time, it's still not very authentic, sadly. And they just went in and blasted the press releases the next day to say that they're cool and they invest in women. It was kind of self-serving. So it's a dilemma today. To be very practical about a recommendation that I think you should do is just work on your quality. Work on your quality, and you find a way in.
Mm-hmm. That's good advice. Thank you, Mr. Vince.
Yes, and thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate your advice. It's very wise. Sorry, Yvonne. Go ahead.
No, don't worry about it. I'd like to ask you about the actual experience of transforming not one but three novels into one game. So naturally, this is gonna bring like lots and lots of difficulties. So can you tell us a bit about the highs and lows of the process, and like where do the difficulties really rise, especially when transforming three independent storylines but set in the same world? Does it have like three different playthroughs? Could you like maybe get technical a bit on that? Could you offer us some insight?
We will see. I think it's really difficult to make a game out of one book, let alone 3 books put together. But one privilege we have is that the writers, so far it seems, we're very early on in the process, by the way, very early on. We're going through the books, we're going through defining the character sheet, the attributes, the settings, the character set, not just the character sheet, the items, the inventory, the style, the theme. Nothing is decided yet. But the way it seems it's going is basically think about it as one book, right? So, and sometimes because the writers so far have given us a lot of privilege and leeway, we can take a setting from one book and an event from another book, and then a hero character from the third book, all put together, because the games are multidimensional, and books. I'm not a novelist. I mean, I'm sure books can have multiple aspects, but you read the words in a row. At the end of the day, you're reading the words in a row, and this is how you experience the book. Okay, Peter does stories where
my imagination is going off into speculation, and I'm thinking when we produce the game, we will then produce 3 novels which will be based on the game, 3 completely different novels inspired by the game, and then we will loop around a game based on each of those novels.
Yeah.
But it flows, we go
Why
with
not?
the flow of the creativity.
Why not? The thing, I think games are like a really good and amazing medium, but they tend to vulgarize a lot of aspects from books, just like movies vulgarize a lot of aspects from books. So books give you, unleash your imagination, because all your eyes see is words, and then your mind has to make up for the rest. Movies and games, they make up the rest for you. And in the case of games, it's even more restrictive. So I give you an example. Let's say we have a combat scene. One player's heroes are supposed to fight another player's heroes. Both players may have the same set of heroes, right? So you'll end up having, let's say your heroes are going to your story, your sample of for sale match. Let's say you have Khalid ibn al-Walid and Tariq bin Ziyad. These are your heroes, and my opponent's heroes are also Khalid ibn al-Walid and Tariq bin Ziyad. So you will have a situation where Khalid is fighting Khalid and Tariq is fighting Tariq. It's that's not gonna happen in a book, right? So we try to have to decide on a game genre, on a gameplay that fits the theme as much as possible. But in case we have those situations that just do not make sense in any book, we will live with them. And it's not gonna be against the narrative. It's not gonna be against the narrative. And we will fold the dimensions, and we will fold the time dimension of the stories of the book onto itself. That's what games is going to do to the book. So you may have scenes from the end of the book at the beginning of your experience. Someone else may have scenes from the middle of the book at the beginning of the experience. But what we need to do is bake the story into all the gameplay elements. So the invent.
Yeah, and that process of baking all the different ideas within the different novels into the one thing that works is great for us as writers, because we're not just novelists. We've written theatre, we've written film scripts, etc. And so for us, it's simply an expansion of our creative process. I now don't really think of myself as a novelist as such. I think of myself as a creative. I'm working on a comic script at the moment, an international comic strip. I'm the narrative writer for it. And so working in the games and with games has given me that a greater sense of what can work in visually, which is very much around comic strip. So yeah, by not getting a fixed idea of who I am, I'm a novelist, I will only write, linear words, etc. Or endings, we novelists, we have one ending normally, you have like 16 endings in a game. Yeah, it's just improvising around that and having an attitude of appreciating the form for what it is. That is, I think, how you get the best out of any game that we create. Abandoning any aesthetic of the novel and saying we want to do the game as best as the game can be. That's my feeling. I'm not sure where Bin stands on it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, if I get you correctly, it was one important thing that you have learned,
I think.
Yeah, please, Vince. Mr. Husub, I think we lost him again. But yeah, Mr. Kalu, so this question is directed to you. So could you maybe tell us more about what was the most important thing you've learned from the writing process, and especially if you had writing for a game in mind rather than a novel? And was it letting go? What was the most important, most valuable lesson you got with that experience?
I think that one of the hardest things for me is that listening to not Vince, who is always in the expression on the money. He always makes great sense. But my other colleagues, Mr. Mahmood and Mr. Burgess, often at the beginning, they made no sense at all what they were talking about in terms of how they adopt their novels to the game. I just couldn't get my head around them. I thought, you know what? They're heading towards senility, or they've been drinking something strange. I just couldn't understand what they wanted to do, and I think it was a matter of forbearance and patience, and over time it turned out it was not they who were wrong-headed, but myself. That I hadn't. They were far ahead of me in terms of understanding how the gameplay could work, and so for that, having the patience and the forbearance and the attitude of when you write your novel, you're God. All the characters do what you want them to do, and things happen. And here I'm in a situation where there's so much knowledge, so much expertise, and so much insight that I never possessed. So I'm playing catch up in a way with the other two, and with Vince, of course. And so I think that's the big learning process for me to understand that when somebody says, Pete, that scene may be the best scene in the novel, but it just won't work. It's to accept it. So acceptance has been hard, yeah.
Yeah, I get you. And if Mr. Rasoub is back, Mr. Rasoub? Oh, he's not. Okay. Well, but following up, so could you tell us more about the difference between writing for a novel and writing for a game? Actually, how could you tell us more about the nuances between that?
Well,
but I don't write for a novel.
He's back.
Welcome back, Mr. Rasoub. So
yeah, for me, writing, I do code. I do write some elementary code, and I did study coding at Salford University in UK. I studied scientific coding, so it's slightly more inflexible in a sense than a lot of the code, or say JavaScript, what have you. But so I've always had an interest in coding, and I actually understood coding to be rather like language acquisition too. You know, in that code is a language. Once you learn with some fluency the language, you can express yourself, and the more coding you learn, and the more you understand the way in which the grammar of the code, the language of it, the better you are. And so yeah, and then novels themselves are just an exercise in language. It's words, you know. So there is something somewhere in which part of my brain, I'm no neuroscientist, I don't know which part, but there's a connection between writing and coding, which makes when somebody expresses something, some technical difficulty, I think it hits the same centers, and I think, okay, we can solve that problem if we just know the subroutine that we need. You know, so for instance, in a novel, you know, a chapter isn't working. The solution may be to rework the chapters that enter into that chapter that isn't working, and then that chapter will work. Well, that's like debugging some subroutine in code. So that's a very geeky explanation. For a more metaphorical one, we may have to bring back Mr. Tariq Mahmood, who is lurking in the background of this conversation and hoping to do no work at all and just click his button. Oh, you're back.
Yes, indeed. No work at all. It just all happened miraculously. Well, it's very true, and I've really been learning a lot from the background. But one of the questions that perhaps many people who will watch this, and if they get this far in the end, is what is, Vince, from you I learned that the creation of the character. What do you look for it as a game maker? I know what we look for it as novelists. What I was very surprised with in our last conversation is how you went not simply about what are the physical attributes of character, or the cultural attributes of the character, but also the psychological and emotional things the character may or may not do. Why is that important in a game?
To be honest, the source I came from.
Silences are always an important part of any.
Okay, look,
we're answering yourself.
Okay, we're having difficulty. We're having difficulty, but let us begin to round up now anyway, and keep in mind. Keep in mind the time as well. We'll see what happens, because I think people viewing should realize we're in different countries and there are technological issues in all different places. And we'll have...
May I just interrupt that somehow your background is the same as mine, even though we may be in different countries. How did that happen?
I don't know what that happened. But shall we please round up a little bit? I think that one of the things that we've tried, we firstly, meaning the three novelists, Melvin Burgess, Peter Kalu, and myself, Melvin, of course, is very, very busy and no doubt tired today on holiday. So he's under strict orders not to work today. But Melvin's novel is the first one of our novels that has come out. That's the one in the corner in the logo, Three Bullets. And one of the things, Pete, and also if we begin to summarize, and we can also answer any last minute questions. What I found, Vince, when just before you went last time, and was when I talked to Vince, was that actually the development of character and all the different components required is perhaps more detail is needed from the gaming point of view than we did from the writing point of view, because we can always delete a word. It doesn't really cost us an awful lot. We can always add a characteristic or a characteristic or an attribute or a particular history as we writing and developing one. But given the fact that the process of making a game involves a lot of programming, a lot of coding and visualization. And just before I go off the point, it's important that this has been this particular point of arrival of literature to video games is a collaboration, not just between three novelists and falafel games, but also between the American University of Beirut, as well as Common Word, a writers' organization based in Manchester. And actually, it's been a phenomenal curve. All of us, I never dreamt really about 3 years back that I would ever be writing video games, or 4 years back. I was terrified of the idea. The last game I'd played in those days was Space Invaders. Probably Faye and Yvonne, your grandparents may have heard of it. Or of course, Peter Kalu is very familiar with it, because he would have been playing that before me. So let us. But where we are, Vince, is that I know we're at a very early stage, and one of the things that we haven't got round to, and I think perhaps we should round it up a little bit and not let this drag on too much. It's been excellent so far. You've done a wonderful job, really, and the answers of Vince have been phenomenal. And really, hopefully, people will learn from it. And one of the things was that when we were developing visuals, for example, our stories, we will deal with that just as we've got the lovely Vince Rasoub here. Next time round, we're hoping to have the equally lovely Dalia Khuddur to come, and she's the visual artist on this game. And perhaps we should throw in some of the early sponsors that we have, like the British Council, who have been very generously helping us be able to actually visualize and get this thing. So we will be talking about how do we visualize, just like in writing. We don't want to come out with stereotypical tropes. We mustn't do the same in the visualization. But also, we don't want to look simply at a white world. I'm tired of the white world. I live in it. I've been, spent all my life in it. We want our own world. So we're very conscious that in that world, stereotypes and tropes can come in. So we've spent quite a lot of time, as you know, and hopefully you'll be able to ask the questions of visual representation of women. How do they come in? Why are men in this particular manner? Why are women in that particular manner? And how we bring all these different things to play, so that, like Vince was saying much earlier on, that we give a much more depth, a cultural specificity, so that it's not like a food that's cooked for all tastes and tasteless in every palate. That there is a uniqueness to it and stuff like that. Well, I am really running out of. We will take. I think if you want to say passing comments, Pete and Vince, we're always talking to each other. Really, the show for you, Vince, and you two youngsters, me and Pete will disappear and conclude on your talking comments. And we thank everyone who has joined us today. We know lots of you have. We know lots of you have stayed on. And if all of you for sharing it on social media, we hope that one day this game will be as an important critique and contribution to the horrors of war, as well as to the enjoyment of playing a video game, as well as learning about the conflicts, contradiction, and issues with which we're all faced. And I know that in Lebanon we are facing terrible conditions all the time. I don't know which horror is coming next, whether when we get oil to a generating plant, the oil tanks go on fire. You know, it's almost one horror after another. And people are surviving. And you are students there. Vince is from there. I'm working there. So in a way, we are overcoming an awful lot. So I will withdraw once again from the stream and let you folks contribute and continue, and we can meet afterwards after we've ended the broadcast. From me, thank you very much for all of you who've listened to us and watched it. It's been wonderful to have you. You can follow on the questions on our Facebook and YouTube, and we'll endeavor to come and answer those. And from Peter Kalu, final words.
I think, Tariq, you said everything, so I'll just say goodbye. Thank you. And
Thank you.
take care.
Thank you, Mr.
Bye
Kalu.
bye. It was an honor. Bye, guys.
So, Mr. Rasool,
Likewise.
for coming
Thank you
out.
so much.
Thank you for everything. Take care, everyone. Thank you, our audiences at home. And a huge thank you to
Bye-bye.
Noor. She's been helping out in the background. Take care, everyone.
Bye.